Granddaughter sent me a text that said, "Grandpa, just transfer the lake house to Dad and stop showing up uninvited. You're making everyone uncomfortable." I read it twice, set my coffee down, and laughed for the first time in months. By the end of that week, the people who wanted me erased had nothing left but a storage unit and a lawyer they couldn't pay. Before I go on, do me a favor and subscribe, then tell me in the comments what time it is where you're sitting right now. I'd like to know who's keeping me company. My name's Wendell. No, that's not right. I keep doing that. My name is Roland Tisdale. I'm 68 years old, and for 31 years I ran a small chain of hardware stores across the Hudson Valley before I sold them and retired up near Lake George, New York. 3 stores became 5, 5 became 9, and somewhere in there, I learned the only lesson that ever mattered in business. People will tell you exactly who they are if you stay quiet long enough to let them. I forgot that lesson exactly once. With my own family, it cost me 5 years and very nearly cost me the rest. The lake house sits on a quiet stretch of shoreline off Route 9N, a cedar-sided place with a wraparound porch and a dock that creaks in a way I find comforting rather than annoying. I bought it in 2004 for $190,000, back when nobody wanted a cabin that far north. Last spring, a realtor knocked on my door unprompted and told me she had a cash buyer ready at $640. I didn't sell. Not then. That house wasn't an asset to me. It was the one place I'd imagined growing old in. The place I'd pictured my son and his family coming up for Thanksgiving. The dock my grandkids would learn to fish off of. The real value was supposed to be inside those walls. That was what I told myself anyway, right up until the people inside those walls told me I wasn't welcome in them. My son, Desmond, wasn't always the man who let his wife type cruelty through his daughter's phone. I remember him at 9 hauling lumber in the bed of my old Ford because he wanted to feel useful, asking me why a 2x4 wasn't actually 2 inches by 4. Curious kid. Big heart, soft hands, the kind of boy who cried at dog movies and never quite grew out of it. His mother, my Eleanor, passed when Desmond was 22, and for a long stretch it was just the two of us figuring out how to be a family with a hole in the middle of it. I co-signed his first apartment. I paid for the wedding I'm about to tell you about. I thought I was building something. Turns out I was just funding someone else's exit. Marguerite came into the picture about 6 years ago. Desmond brought her to a 4th of July cookout at the lake, and I'll be honest with you, she made an impression. Sharp, lovely. The kind of woman who remembers the name of every person in a room and uses it like a tool. But I spent 3 decades watching people walk into my stores, and you learn the difference between somebody who appreciates a thing and somebody who appreciates a thing and somebody who's pricing it. Marguerite looked at my lake house the way I used to look at a failing competitor's lease. Not, "Isn't this beautiful?" More like, "What would I do with this once it's mine?" They married 7 months later. I paid for the band, the catering, the tent, all of it. Marguerite called it intimate. I called it $41,000. For the first 2 years, they had a place of their own down in Glens Falls, a nice rental. Desmond could afford on his salary as a regional sales manager. Then Marguerite got pregnant, and that's where the trouble really put down roots. She had my granddaughter, Penny, and let me say right now that Penny is the one genuinely innocent person in this whole story. A sweet kid caught between adults who should have known better. When Penny was about 8 months old, Desmond sat across from me at a diner and asked if they could move into the lake house. "Just for a year, Dad. Just until we get back on our feet." A baby. My granddaughter. What was I going to say? I said yes. I always said yes. 5 years. 5 years they lived in my house, and not one of those years included rent, a utility bill, a property tax payment, or so much as a thank you that didn't have a request stapled to the back of it. I told myself it was family. I told myself it was family. I told myself grandparents are supposed to help, and the whole time the comments accumulated like silt in a slow river. Marguerite started small. "At dinner, Roland, you know they make hearing aids now that nobody can even see." I heard her fine. I just didn't always feel like answering. Then bigger. In front of company, we worry about Dad rattling around in here alone, don't we, Des? A man his age should really be somewhere with staff. Staff. Like I was a building that needed maintenance. The cruelest ones always wore the costume of concern. What if you fall on that dock and we don't hear you, Roland? It keeps me up at night. It did not keep her up at night. What kept her up at night was the deed with my name on it, and only my name on it, and only my name on it. Meanwhile, my house became their backdrop. Marguerite called herself a lifestyle and wellness creator, which, as far as I can tell, meant photographing my kitchen, my porch, and my dock for an audience of about 9,000 strangers, then complaining that the engagement was down. My dining room table, where Eleanor and I used to do the crossword every Sunday, became a ring light station 18 hours a day. The good coffee I'd bought disappeared into oat milk concoctions she filmed and never drank. Desmond pulled in maybe $85,000 a year, Marguerite's creator income. When I finally saw it on a loan application she asked me to co-sign, was $4,000 for the year. Yet they drove a leased Lincoln Navigator. They took Penny to a private preschool that cost more than my first car, and they flew to Cabo twice. The math only worked because I was the missing variable. $3,000 a month in rent they weren't paying, plus utilities, plus the little loans Desmond requested and forgot, plus the preschool I covered just this once, 4 separate times. The thing that finally turned the key, though, wasn't money. It was Greta. I met Greta last winter at the public library in Lake George, of all places. She was a retired high school English teacher running a Tuesday night book club, 63 years old. With reading glasses she lost 12 times an hour, and a laugh that came from somewhere real. I started showing up to the book club without having read the book, which she figured out immediately and never let me forget. Coffee turned into dinner and turned into Friday nights playing cribbage at her kitchen table. For the first time since Eleanor, somebody looked at me and saw a person instead of a checkbook with a pulse. I mentioned Greta exactly once at the lake house, casually, passing the potatoes. Marguerite's fork stopped midair. "You're seeing someone?" She said it the way you'd say, "You're under investigation." "At your age?" I told her I was 68, not embalmed. She and Desmond did that married couple eye thing, the silent telegraph, and I swear to you it was the first time in 5 years that look didn't make me happy for them. It made the hair on my neck stand up. A couple of weeks later I decided it was time for Greta to come up for a proper dinner. "Just the 4 of us," I said. "Let her meet the family." Marguerite stood up off my couch so fast her ring light wobbled. "Absolutely not. I am not comfortable having some stranger in my home. My home. Not the lake house. Not your home, Roland. My home. Not the one she'd never paid a cent toward. Greta isn't a stranger," I said. "She matters to me." Marguerite's voice climbed straight up a staircase. "She's some woman from a library, and you want to march her in here so we all sit around and pretend this is normal? I have a say in who comes into this house. I looked at my son. I have a say in who comes into this house." I looked at my son. Desmond was studying his phone, like it held the cure for cancer. "Des," I said, "you got anything to add?" He glanced at his wife, then at me. "Dad, maybe now's not the time. Penny's got a routine. It's a lot of change." I didn't argue. I'd learned a long time ago that arguing with people who've already decided you're the problem just gives them more material. I picked up my keys and said I'd be out for the evening. And I went and sat at Greta's kitchen table and told her the whole thing. And she held my hand and said, gently, "Roland, that's not a family. That's a tenancy, and you're the only one not getting paid." I laughed, but it stuck in me like a splinter because she was right, and I'd known she was right for years. I drove home around 10. The house was dark except for the blue flicker of the television. I went out to the garage workshop, a little corner I'd set up where I rebuilt old outboard motors, the one hobby Marguerite hadn't found a way to mock, mostly because she didn't understand it. I had a 1968 Effenrude on the bench, seized up for decades, and I was easing the flywheel free when my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Penny's phone. But the words weren't from any 6-year-old. "Grandpa, just transfer the lake house to Dad and stop showing up uninvited." You're making everyone uncomfortable. It's better for all of us. I sat there on my workshop stool with the smell of two-stroke oil and lake water around me, and I read it 3 times. They'd used the baby's phone. They'd reached past my granddaughter and used her like a shield, because they figured I'd never be hard on anything that came from Penny. That was the calculation. That was how little they thought of me, and how much. And then I smiled. Not because it was funny, because something that had been jammed for 5 years finally broke loose. The same satisfying click as that flywheel coming free in my hands. I set the phone face down on the bench, and I sat in the quiet and let the lake do the talking through the open window. I want to be honest about something, because the people who watch these stories deserve honesty. I didn't decide to destroy anyone that night. I'm not a vengeful man by nature. 30 years in business will either make you cruel or teach you patience, and it taught me patience. What I decided that night was simpler and, I think, harder. I decided to stop. Stop paying. Stop covering. Stop pretending that being needed was the same as being loved. Everything that happened after came not from my anger, but from their arithmetic. They'd built their whole lives on a number that only existed because I kept paying it. All I did was stop being the number. But I'm also not a fool, and I want you to understand that this didn't start the night of the text. It started 3 years earlier, the first time Marguerite floated the words "assisted living" across my dinner table like she was doing me a favor. I'd been in enough negotiations to recognize an opening bid. When somebody shows you the move they're planning, you don't panic, you prepare. So 3 years ago, I called a man named Foster Quibley, an estate attorney I'd used for 2 decades of property deals, and I told him I wanted to tidy up my affairs. Routine stuff, I said. Update the will, clarify the trust. Nothing dramatic. Marguerite and Desmond never asked a single question about it, because people who assume they'll inherit everything rarely read the fine print on how. Assumption, I've learned, is the softest spot on any opponent. You can drive a truck right through it. The morning after the text, I was up at 6. I made coffee in my own kitchen. The kitchen that was legally and entirely mine, and I sat and waited. Desmond came down at 7:30, looking like he hadn't slept. He saw me, opened his mouth, closed it. "You sleep all right?" I asked. "Pleasant as you like." "Dad, about the message last night." "Nothing to discuss," I said. Penny was very articulate for a kindergartner. He went red. "I can explain." "No need," I said, rinsing my cup. "You told me to disappear. I'm a man who honors requests. I've got some errands today. You and Marguerite enjoy the place." I left him standing in the kitchen with his mouth open, and I'll tell you something. Watching a confident man realize he's lost control of a situation he thought he owned is its own quiet music. Foster Quibley's office was on the 2nd floor of a brick building in downtown Glens Falls, the kind with good radiators and bad parking. He met me with a folder already on the table because he'd seen this coming since the day I first walked in 3 years before. "Roland," he said, "what's changed?" I told him my granddaughter's phone had texted me to sign over the house and vanish. He didn't flinch. Lawyers who've done family work for 30 years stop flinching. He opened the folder and laid it all out. The trust that gave me total control of every asset. The deed showing me as sole owner of the lake house. 5 years of utility statements and tax receipts, every single one in my name alone. And the loan documents where I'd co-signed Desmond's truck and Marguerite's so-called business line of credit. That last folder was the one that mattered most, though I didn't fully understand why yet. Foster did. "Roland," he said, tapping it. "You're not just their landlord. You're the only thing standing between them and their creditors. The minute you step back from these cosigns, the bank's going to want the full balances. They've been making minimum payments, your name guarantees." I asked him what my options were. He smiled the way a surgeon smiles before he tells you the tumor's operable. "All of them," he said. We spent the better part of the afternoon. By the end I knew exactly how it would go and the order it would go in, the way I used to plan a store opening. Permits first, then inventory, then the soft launch. Nobody notices until the doors are already open. The first move was the gentlest and the most legally airtight. New York requires proper notice to remove an occupant who isn't on a lease. even family, even someone who's been there 5 years. So Foster drafted a notice to quit. 30 days. Either they began paying fair market rent, $3,100 a month, $200 under what comparable lakefront places were going for, I checked. Or they vacated the premises. The second move, the one they'd never see until it had already happened, was that I instructed the bank, in writing, that I was withdrawing as guarantor on every loan I'd co-signed, effective at the close of the notice period. The third move I kept to myself for the moment. The courier delivered the notice to the lake house at noon the next day. I wasn't there. I was at Greta's, beating her soundly at cribbage and losing on purpose at the next hand, so she wouldn't quit playing with me. My phone started buzzing at 12, 11. By 12:40, I had 9 missed calls from Desmond and 4 from Marguerite. By the time Greta and I finished our coffee, it was up to 17. "You're really not going to answer?" she asked. "They're not calling to talk," I said. "They're not calling to talk," I said. "They're calling to yell. I've got no use for either right now." Around 6 that evening, I picked up on the 22nd call. Desmond didn't say hello. He said, "Are you out of your mind?" "Good evening to you too. You can't kick us out, Dad. This is our home. Penny's whole life is here." Penny's life, I said, was used as a return address on a text telling me to vanish. "Don't put that little girl in your mouth right now." Silence on the line. Then Marguerite, who'd clearly been waiting with her hand out for the phone. "This is about that woman. You're trying to tear us out so you can move your girlfriend in." "This is about respect," I said, "or the complete absence of it. The rent I'm asking is below market. If you think it's unfair, you're welcome to look at every other lakefront listing in Warren County." "We're not paying you rent to live in a house that's basically ours." "It has never been even partially yours," I said. "Your name has never been on one document that mattered. You've been guests. The visit is over." She started to scream something about ungratefulness, about everything she'd done for this family, and I set the phone down on Greta's table without hanging up and let her holler at the wood grain for a while. Then I picked it back up and said, 30 days, Florida. Sorry, New York real property law spells out the rest. Foster can send you the citation if you'd like to read along. And I hung up. The next morning I started loading my truck. Not everything, just what was mine and what mattered. Clothes, Eleanor's photographs, the outboard motors, my tools, the cribbage board. Greta had insisted I take home. I'd already lined up a furnished one-bedroom in a 55 and over community over in Queensbury, $1,800 a month, small but clean, with a window that caught the morning. People in the comments always ask me this, so let me answer it head on. Why leave my own house? Why not throw them out and stay? Because Foster told me, plainly, that the cleanest legal path, the one least likely to let Marguerite drag things out with claims about her residence, was for me to be demonstrably, physically settled somewhere else while the eviction processed. The sole owner who'd already moved on. It wasn't surrender. It was strategy. I wasn't fleeing the house. I was repossessing my life. And the house was just the last box I hadn't packed yet. Desmond came out to the driveway while I was strapping the Evinrude into the truck bed. "Dad, wait. Can we just talk, like men?" "We can talk through Foster," I said. "Come on, don't be like this. We can fix it." I straightened up and looked at my son, really looked at him, and for a second I saw the 9-year-old in the bed of the old Ford. "Des," I said, "tell me what the text said, out loud." He couldn't. He looked at his shoes. I was angry. He finally managed. "Marguerite was upset about the dinner, and you let your wife use your daughter's phone to tell your father to disappear," I said. "There's no version of that I can talk my way past, and there's no version of it you can. People make their choices. I'm just letting yours arrive." I got in the truck and pulled out, and in the side mirror I saw Marguerite standing on my porch with her arms crossed, mouthing something I was glad I couldn't hear. Here's the part Marguerite hadn't done the math on. The notice to quit was the noise. The withdrawal of my guarantees was the knife. 3 weeks into the notice period, the bank sent Desmond and Marguerite formal letters, with me no longer guaranteeing the Navigator lease, the truck loan, and Marguerite's business credit line. Every one of those accounts reverted to their actual creditworthiness, which on paper was a fog. The leasing company wanted the Navigator back or a balloon payment they didn't have. The business line, $11,000 Marguerite had drawn down on ring lights, content trips, and a brand consultant came due, secured by exactly nothing now that my name was off it. And the eviction clock kept ticking the whole time. They had 30 days to find $3,100 a month they'd never once managed to produce, while simultaneously discovering that the comfortable life they'd built was a building with my name as the only load-bearing wall. They scrambled. Marguerite, I heard later from a mutual acquaintance, tried to launch a fundraiser online about a family housing crisis, which got taken down once people who knew the situation started commenting. Desmond actually retained a lawyer, spent money he didn't have on a man who looked at the deed, the trust, and the notice, and told him, "I'm told that there was nothing to fight. You can't litigate your way into owning a house your name has never touched." So they spent their last real money on a lawyer instead of a deposit on a place they could afford, which tells you everything about whose advice they were taking. On day 28, with no rent paid and no sign of leaving, Foster filed for formal eviction, and a county officer posted the notice on the door of my lake house. I wasn't there. I was on Greta's porch watching a heron stand in the shallows like it had all the time in the world, and maybe it did. My phone buzzed once. A text from Desmond's number this time, not Penny's. "Dad, please, we have nowhere to go." I looked at it for a long minute. Then I texted back the only honest thing I had. "There are 2-bedroom apartments in Glens Falls for $1,400 a month." I looked. "You can afford one if you sell the Navigator, and Marguerite gets a job. I love you, son. I'm not your safety net anymore. I'm just your father." And I turned the phone over and watched the heron a while longer. They were out in 2 more weeks, court-ordered, in the end, with a constable present. And from what I gather, there was a great deal of screaming on the lawn. Most of it from Marguerite, some of it directed at Desmond, which I confess I felt nothing about either way. They ended up in a rented duplex on the unfashionable side of Glens Falls, the Navigator repossessed, the credit line in collections, the private preschool a memory. Marguerite, I understand, took a job at a department store cosmetics counter, which is honest work and more than she'd done in years. Desmond kept his sales job. The lifestyle was gone. The arithmetic had finally balanced. And the lake house? I sold it. $640,000, cash, the buyer, the same realtor's client who'd come knocking the year before. People asked me if it hurt to let it go after I'd dreamed of dying on that porch. It didn't. Somewhere along the way, I'd figured out that a house isn't where you grow old. People are. The doc didn't love me. Eleanor's memory came with me in a box. It was never in the cedar siding. I took the proceeds, paid off nothing because I owed nothing, and put most of it into the kind of boring, sensible investments a hardware man trusts. And I bought a smaller place on a smaller lake with Greta, who beat me at cribbage in it the very first night and has not stopped since. I want to say something to the people who type, "He should have just thrown them out from day one," because you're not wrong, exactly. I should have set a boundary in year 1. The lesson I'd learned in business. Let people show you who they are. Only works if, once they've shown you, you actually believe them. I didn't for 5 years because believing them meant believing my own son had let me become a wallet with a heartbeat. That's a hard thing to look at across your own breakfast table. So I waited too long. If you're watching this and there's somebody in your life turning your kindness into an expectation, don't wait as long as I did. Believe them the first time. Desmond calls now, about once a month. Short calls. He doesn't ask for money, which is new, and he doesn't apologize, which tells me he's not quite there yet. I take the calls because he's my son, and because someday, if he does the slow work of becoming the man I raised instead of the man Marguerite leased, there might be something to rebuild, not the same thing. That version's gone, sold with the house. But something honest, built on the ground floor for once instead of on my back. I haven't deleted his number. I haven't called it either. It just sits there. A door I haven't decided whether to open. People hear this story and want me to say I got revenge. I didn't. Revenge is something you do to someone. All I did was stop doing things for people who'd mistaken my doing them for weakness. I didn't push anyone off a ledge. I just stopped standing under them with my arms out. The fall was always theirs to take, whenever they chose to step off. And they chose. That's not vengeance. That's gravity. That's a man finally letting go of a flywheel that's been jammed for 5 years, feeling it spin free and true, and understanding that the only thing that had been broken all that time was his refusal to believe what he was looking at. I'm 68 years old. I sleep through the night now, and there's a woman 2 rooms over who chose me for nothing but my company. I'd say that's the best return on investment I ever earned. The hardest thing I ever had to admit wasn't that my son let me down. It was that I let it happen for 5 years, and I knew the whole time. I sat in that garage with a seized-up motor in my hands, and the truth was already there in the oil and the quiet. I had taught everyone around me, including Desmond, that my kindness had no bottom. People don't dig a hole on their own. You hand them the shovel one just this once at a time. The text from Penny's phone didn't create what Marguerite became. It just turned the lights on so I could finally see the room I'd been living in. Here's what I'd tell anyone watching who's standing where I stood. Being a good man doesn't mean letting people stand on you. For most of my life, I confused those two things. I thought the right thing and the soft thing were the same thing, that love meant absorbing whatever came so nobody felt the consequences of their own choices. But a father who never lets his son hit the ground raises a man who never learns to stand. The kindest thing I did for Desmond, in the end, was take my arms away and let gravity teach him what my patience never could. That's not cruelty. That's the difference between loving a person and rescuing them from the lesson they need most. The part that saved me wasn't anger. Anger would have had me throwing them out in year 1 with a slammed door under regret I'd carry for life. What saved me was sitting still long enough to think, calling Foster 3 years before I needed him, keeping the deed clean, reading the fine print on those cosigns nobody else bothered to read. The quiet man who plans always beats the loud one who reacts. I learned that selling hardware, and I'd forgotten it inside my own kitchen. When I finally used my head and said of my hurt, the whole thing took 3 weeks, and not one raised voice from me. And none of it would have mattered without the nerve to actually do it. Knowing the right move and making it to 2 different countries, and the border between them is fear. Fear of being alone. Fear of being the bad guy. Fear that if I stopped paying, I'd stop being needed, and being needed was the last thing tying me to my son. I had to be willing to lose him to keep myself. That took more out of me than any of it. I'm 68. I sleep through the night now. There's a woman 2 rooms over, Greta, who beat me at cribbage again last night and chose me for nothing but my company. I didn't get there by being harder than they were. I got there by finally being honest about what I was looking at, having the sense to prepare for it quietly, and the backbone to follow through when the moment came. That's the whole secret. There isn't another one.